It started as just another morning in New York City. The studio lights at ABC shimmered to life, cameras rolled into position, and producers hurried across the glossy floors preparing for what was supposed to be an easy, upbeat show. On the guest list that day, none other than America's beloved king of comedy and television charm, Steve Harvey. The plan was simple, a lighthearted chat about his latest book, a few jokes about Family Feud, and a touch of that trademark Steve Harvey wisdom that fans couldn't get enough of. Before we begin, tell us where are you watching from, also subscribe. But what no one saw coming was that this routine interview would soon unravel into one of the most uncomfortable and talked about moments in daytime TV history. Steve arrived early, as he often did, his presence lighting up the hallway before he even reached the dressing room. His laughter bounced off the studio walls, warming up the crew as he greeted everyone by name. Makeup artists, camera operators, production assistants. He was in his element, confident, polished, the definition of professional charisma. The man had done this 1,000 times before. For him, The View was just another stop on a long media tour. But inside the studio, something felt off. The hosts were already gathered, sipping coffee, running through cue cards. Whoopi Goldberg, calm and centered as always, prepped to steer the discussion. Sunny Hostin reviewed her questions, but Joy Behar sat unusually quiet, arms crossed. Her expression unreadable. Maybe it was just a bad morning. Maybe something behind the scenes had rubbed her the wrong way. Whatever it was, the producers noticed the tension and ignored it. After all, Joy was known for her fiery energy. Maybe it would make for good television. As the audience filed in, laughter and chatter filled the air. The stage glowed with warmth, that familiar orange and blue palette of daytime comfort. The View wasn't just a show, it was a ritual for millions of Americans sipping their late morning coffee. The atmosphere promised fun, conversation, and a few laughs. The perfect setup for Steve Harvey's signature humor. Then came the cue. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whoopi announced, her voice booming through the speakers, "please welcome the king of family television himself, Mr. Steve Harvey." The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, whistles. The entire room came alive as Steve strode onto the stage with that unmistakable swagger. He flashed his million-dollar smile, waved to the audience, and hugged each of the co-hosts one by one. Whoopi laughed warmly, Sunny greeted him with admiration, and then there was Joy. Her hug was brief, stiff, offbeat. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. Steve caught it instantly, reading her energy like a comedian reads a crowd. Still, he brushed it off. He'd dealt with tougher audiences, harsher critics, and way more unpredictable personalities. If Joy was in a mood, he figured he could charm her out of it. Once everyone was seated, Whoopi opened the segment with her usual grace. "Steve, welcome back to The View. You've got so much happening. The book, the comedy special, Family Feud still dominating the ratings. How do you manage to do it all?" Steve leaned back in his chair, flashing a grin. "You know, Whoopi, when you love what you do, it don't feel like work. I've been blessed. Every show, every project, it's just another chance to make people laugh and maybe help them figure a few things out along the way." The audience chuckled, hanging on every word. Steve launched into a few behind-the-scenes stories from Family Feud. Hilarious moments that never made it to air. He teased himself, cracked jokes about contestants' wild answers, and even tossed in a bit of spontaneous relationship advice that had the audience roaring with laughter. Everything was going perfectly. The co-hosts relaxed, nodding along. The conversation flowed smoothly, the timing crisp, the humor effortless. It was the kind of TV gold producers dream about, natural, charming, and heartwarming. But then, just as the momentum peaked, Joy Behar leaned forward in her chair, her voice cutting through the laughter like a sharp blade. "Steve," she began, with that signature smirk that could mean either curiosity or challenge, "I have to ask, you've built a career on giving people relationship advice, right?" Steve nodded, still smiling. "That's right, Joy." She tilted her head, her tone suddenly firmer. "Well, you've been married 3 times. Doesn't that seem, I don't know, a little hypocritical?" The air in the studio changed instantly. The laughter vanished. The audience froze. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Steve's smile flickered for half a second before he caught himself, adjusting his posture, his expression settling into polite composure. "Well, Joy," he said, his voice measured but calm, "I think my experiences, good and bad, actually qualify me to help other people. I've learned a lot from my past, and that's exactly what makes my advice valuable. I'm not pretending to be perfect, I'm saying I've been through it. A few claps from the audience, a murmur, but Joy wasn't done. Oh, come on, she pushed, leaning in closer. You've had 3 marriages, Steve. That's not exactly the record of a relationship expert, is it? Seems like it's a little too convenient to turn all that into profit. Whoopi shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. Sunny's eyes widened. Producers offstage exchanged worried glances, whispering into their headsets. This wasn't the segment they had planned. This wasn't fun. Steve's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but his voice stayed smooth. Joy, I think you're missing the point. I don't hide my past. I talk about it. I've failed, sure, but I've learned. And if what I've learned can help somebody else, then I'll keep talking. The tension hung heavy in the air. Part 1 ends with that unspoken silence, the kind that makes live television both thrilling and terrifying. Everyone in the room knew they had just crossed a line. What started as harmless promotion had become something else entirely, and Steve Harvey, always the professional, was about to decide whether to keep playing nice or push back. The silence after Joy Behar's question felt like an eternity. For a split second, all you could hear was the faint hum of the studio lights and the soft rustle of audience members shifting in their seats. Steve Harvey's trademark smile remained, but his eyes told a different story. Alert, calculating, ready. He had been in television long enough to know when a conversation was about to turn, and this one was on the verge of explosion. Whoopi, sensing the tension, jumped in with her trademark calm. All right now, let's not scare our guest away just yet, she said with a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. The audience chuckled nervously, but the energy in the room didn't recover. Joy wasn't backing down. Come on, Whoopi, she pressed, gesturing towards Steve. We're just asking questions here. It's The View. We have conversations. That's what we do. Her voice had that playful edge, but underneath there was something sharper, something almost personal. Steve adjusted his tie, keeping his composure. That's all right, Whoopi. Joy's just doing her job. He turned slightly toward Joy, his tone cool but steady. But let me tell you something, Joy. I don't mind being asked tough questions. I just believe there's a way to do it without making it sound like an attack. A low ooh rippled through the crowd, the kind of reaction daytime audiences live for. Whoopi raised her eyebrows. Sunny Hostin looked down at her cue cards, unsure whether to intervene or just let the moment ride itself out. Joy gave a dismissive wave of her hand. Oh, Steve, don't be so sensitive. You're a comedian. You can take it. Steve chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You're right, I can take it. But see, comedians, we're used to jokes that land with truth, not jabs dressed up as questions. The audience reacted again, this time with cautious applause. Joy smiled tightly, not about to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Whoopi, ever the peacemaker, tried again to pull things back to neutral ground. All right, let's shift gears a little. Steve, tell us about your new book. You always have a way of helping people see relationships from a real-world perspective. What inspired this one? Steve smiled, grateful for the redirect. You know, Whoopi, I wrote this book because I think people overcomplicate love. We want it to be perfect. We want it to be easy, but it's not. It's work every day, and I've learned that you can't have a strong relationship without going through some storms. The crowd applauded, the tension easing for the first time in minutes. Steve's delivery was smooth, heartfelt, authentic. He was back in control, steering the conversation where he wanted it. For a moment, everything felt like it might go back to normal, but Joy wasn't finished. As the applause faded, she leaned forward again. Storms, huh? That's an interesting word choice. So when the storm gets too rough, you just start over with a new wife? The audience collectively gasped. Even Whoopi's jaw dropped slightly. It was a line that didn't just cross professional boundaries, it leaped over them. Steve blinked, his composure flickering. He stared at Joy, trying to decide whether to answer or walk away. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression. The twitch of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, the half smile that wasn't really a smile at all. Finally, he leaned forward. You know, Joy, I didn't come here to defend my personal life, but since you brought it up, I'll say this. Yes, I've been married more than once. I've failed, I've succeeded, and I've learned. That's life. If you've never fallen, you don't know how to get back up. And the fact that I'm still standing, still loving, still building, that's something I'm proud of. The audience erupted in applause. It was one of those moments that felt unscripted, raw, real. Even some of the crew members in the wings nodded in respect. Steve Harvey had turned the confrontation into a moment of triumph, but Joy Behar wasn't giving him the win so easily. "Well," she said, leaning back in her chair, "you sure do know how to spin a story, Steve. Maybe you should run for office." Laughter scattered through the audience, some genuine, some uneasy. Steve smiled, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "No, ma'am," he replied calmly. "I'll leave the spin to people who can't admit when they're wrong." Whoopi sighed loudly, raising her hands. "All right, folks, let's take a quick break before this turns into Family Feud. Talk show edition." The audience laughed, grateful for the release of tension, while producers immediately cut to commercial. As the cameras powered down, the air in the studio changed completely. The cheerful facade of daytime television slipped away. Crew members whispered. One of the producers stepped toward Joy, quietly asking her to ease up after the break, but Joy brushed them off. "Relax," she muttered. "It's just television." Steve, meanwhile, sat silently in his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor. He wasn't angry, not yet, but there was something brewing beneath the surface. He'd been insulted on television before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a jab at his personal life, it was an attack on his integrity. When Whoopi returned from backstage, she placed a gentle hand on Steve's shoulder. "You good?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, I'm good. I've been through worse." But even as he said it, his jaw remained tight. He could handle criticism. He'd built a career out of it. But he wasn't about to let anyone, not even a veteran like Joy Behar, take cheap shots at him without consequence. As the stage manager counted down to the next segment, Steve took a deep breath, straightened his suit, and looked directly into the camera lens. The break was over. The show was back on, and this time, Steve Harvey wasn't playing nice. When the red light on the camera blinked back to life, the tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. The audience, still buzzing from the commercial break, had no idea what had just gone down off air. The host smiled wide for the camera, but behind those smiles were clenched jaws and racing thoughts. Whoopi Goldberg, ever the professional, reintroduced the segment with her signature composure. Welcome back to The View, everyone. We're here with Steve Harvey, comedian, host, author, and all-around busy man. Her tone was deliberately calm, almost pleading for the energy to stay positive. Steve nodded, smiling, but his eyes said otherwise. He wasn't angry in the loud, confrontational sense. No, this was the kind of quiet anger that simmers. He had been disrespected on live television, and that didn't sit right with him. Before the break, Whoopi continued, we were talking about your new book on relationships. You were saying something about learning through the ups and downs. Yeah, Steve replied, leaning forward, his voice smooth but pointed. You know, Whoopi, life will teach you lessons you don't sign up for. You don't always get to choose the test, but you can choose how you respond. That's what I try to share. The lessons from the pain. Because let's be honest, people relate more to your scars than your trophies. The audience clapped, clearly on his side. It was heartfelt, humble, and powerful. For a moment, the mood seemed to recover, until Joy Behar couldn't resist one more dig. Scars are fine, she said, shrugging casually, but at some point, people start wondering if you're the one holding the knife. The room froze. It was the kind of line that could make or break a segment. Biting, clever, and cruel all at once. The audience gasped audibly this time, and even Whoopi's face dropped. She turned to Joy with disbelief. Joy. Come on, she murmured under her breath, but the microphone caught it anyway. Steve sat back in his chair slowly, the silence stretching on. His usual easy grin was gone now. When he finally spoke, his tone was low and deliberate. Joy, he said, you know, I came on this show to talk about growth, about how to take pain and turn it into purpose, but you seem determined to turn this into a roast. Joy chuckled, crossing her arms. Oh, please, Steve, it's not that serious. We just like to keep things real around here. Steve leaned in, locking eyes with her. No, see, that's the problem. There's a difference between being real and being rude. Real is asking a hard question with respect. Rude is trying to embarrass somebody for entertainment. That line hit like thunder. The audience broke into applause again, this time louder, more defiant. The viewers at home might have thought it was all part of the act, but in the studio, everyone could feel it. This was no act. Joy's face tightened. Oh, come on, she said with a strained laugh. You can't seriously be that thin-skinned. You've roasted people your entire career. Yeah, Steve replied, his voice rising slightly now, but I roast with love. I roast to make people laugh, not to tear them down. There's a big difference, Joy. One's comedy, the other's cruelty. The applause erupted again. A few audience members even stood. The energy had shifted entirely. What started as a conversation was now a standoff. Whoopi stepped in, her patience clearly wearing thin. All right, y'all. Let's remember, this is still daytime TV, she said, half joking, half serious. We ain't trying to turn this into pay-per-view. The audience laughed, but even she knew it wasn't enough to break the tension. Steve looked directly into the camera, almost ignoring Joy now. You know, I tell people all the time, growth comes when you can admit your flaws. I've done that plenty of times, but when people attack you for your past instead of celebrating your progress, that says more about them than it does about you. A wave of applause rolled through the crowd again. The cameraman instinctively zoomed in on his face. This was TV gold, raw emotion, truth, and pride all colliding in real time. Joy folded her arms tighter. Well, I think honesty is important too, she said. People deserve to know who they're taking advice from. That's all I'm saying. Steve nodded slowly, and they do. I've never hidden my story, but you might want to think about why you're so eager to dig into someone else's. That line landed like a mic drop. Whoopi, realizing things were seconds away from truly blowing up, stepped in one last time. Alright, let's take another quick break before y'all make me lose my job. She forced a laugh, signaling for the camera to cut, but even she looked shaken. As the commercial music faded in and the cameras powered down again, the studio was dead quiet. Joy immediately looked away, pretending to check her notes. Steve sat still, breathing deeply through his nose. The crew moved carefully, as if afraid to make a sound. Finally, Whoopi leaned forward and whispered, "Steve, I'm sorry about that. We didn't plan any of this." Steve gave a slow nod. "It's all right, Whoopi. I've been through worse. But I'll tell you what, if this is how daytime TV rolls now, I might have to stick to comedy." Joy smirked faintly. "Well, that might be best," she said, not looking up. Steve turned toward her then, his voice barely above a whisper, but every word sharp as a blade. "Joy, I've been on this earth long enough to know when someone's trying to test me, but let me make one thing clear. You can come for my jokes, but you don't get to come for my character." Whoopi's eyes widened. Sunny shifted uncomfortably. It was clear now. This wasn't just tension, this was personal. The producer motioned for everyone to reset for the final segment, whispering urgently into his mic, "Whatever happens next, just keep rolling." Because they all knew something unforgettable was about to happen. And when the show returned, Steve Harvey wasn't the same charming guest they'd welcomed earlier. He was a man with something to prove. The final segment began with an uneasy calm. The theme music faded and the audience's applause felt forced, more like a nervous habit than genuine excitement. Everyone in the studio could sense it. The tension hadn't gone anywhere. If anything, it had grown heavier, thicker, like a storm waiting to break. Whoopi Goldberg, the veteran moderator, took a deep breath and put on her best television smile. "Welcome back to The View, y'all," she said, her tone steady but cautious. "We're still here with Steve Harvey, comedian, TV host, and best-selling author. Now, Steve, before the break, we were talking about your new book and the lessons you've learned from love, right?" Steve nodded, flashing a professional grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, Whoopi, that's right. I just think people forget that growth takes failure. You can't become wise if you've never been foolish. You can't appreciate peace if you've never been through chaos." The audience clapped, grateful for the return to civility. For a moment, it seemed like the tension might finally ease. But sitting just a few feet away, Joy Behar wasn't ready to let it die. She leaned forward again, the corners of her mouth curled in that familiar, challenging smirk. "That's all well and good, Steve," she began, "but some people might say you've turned your failures into a business. Every mistake becomes a lesson, every breakup becomes a book. At what point do we stop calling it wisdom and start calling it marketing?" The collective gasp from the crowd was immediate. Even the camera operator flinched. Whoopi closed her eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly as if praying for strength. Sunny Hostin muttered a quiet, "Oh no," under her breath. Steve froze, his expression hardening for just a second before he composed himself. If you like this video, then subscribe.